Hello, my name is Danny Ray, and today I'm going to be doing a lecture about the anatomy of the pelvis. I'm going to be using etymology as a learning tool throughout this lecture. So, starting with the word pelvis, it comes from the Latin base for basin, as can be seen from the shape of the pelvis. So, starting with the bone structure, so there are three bones in the pelvis, including the hip bone, the sacrum, and the coccyx. There are two hip bones, and they're each composed of three main parts: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. So, starting with the ilium comes from the Latin root to mean groin, or flank side of the body from the hips to the groin. Interestingly, it sounds a lot like the Iliad, a book by Homer about the War of Troy, and ilium means Troy. It's the largest bone of the part of the pelvic bone and has a crest, which means tuft or plume at the top of the helmet, and that is a word of Latin origin, and it attaches to the spinal segments L4 and L5 with the iliolumbar ligament. It has an ala, which means wing, or iliac fossa, which in Latin means ditch, and this attaches to the sacrum with the anterior sacroiliac ligament. A posterior superior iliac spine, which attaches to the sacrum with the posterior sacroiliac ligaments, and an anterior superior iliac spine and an anterior inferior iliac spine. So the second part is the ischium, which refers to the bottom lateral posterior side of the pelvic bone. It means seat bone in Latin, and from the Greek word ischion, which means hip joint. The ischium consists of the ischial body, the ischial spine, and spine means backbone in Latin. The sacrospinous ligament attaches this to the sacrum, and the ischial tuberosity, which is the bump on the posterior side, and the ischial ramus, and in Latin, rami means branch, and this is attached to the inferior ramus of the pubis. So going on to the pubis, which lies anterior to the ischium and connects the ischium to the ilium, from the Latin pubis, which means genital area. It also contains the pecten pubis, and or pectineal line, and pecten means cone. So it's the cone part of the pubis, and a pubic tubercle. Both the pubic tubercles of either pelvic bone are connected together by the pubic symphysis. So symphysis is a Greek word which comprises the two parts syn, which means together, and physis, which means growth. So it's the growth of the two parts, and they're conjoined together at this middle part, in this middle bit. So a ligament called the sacrotuberous ligament connects the tuberosity of the pubis to the sacrum. So the sacrum, which is the large central bone, comes from the word sacer, which means sacred. Interestingly, in ancient history, this was a part offered in sacrifices, as it was deemed sacred. Finally, the coccyx, at the bottom, was named by the Greek physician Galen, named after the bird the coccyx, which in England you might recognise as the cuckoo. And it was named so because it resembles the beak of the cuckoo. So in terms of the foramina of the pelvis, so there's the greater sciatic foramen, which is the most superior foramen and is bordered superiorly by the anterior sacroiliac ligament, medially by the sacrotuberous ligament, inferiorly by the sacrospinous ligament, and laterally by the ilium, and it contains the superior gluteal vein, artery, and nerve. Then there's the lesser sciatic foramen, which is bordered by the superiorly by the sacrospinous ligament, inferiorly and medially by the sacrotuberous ligament, and laterally by the ischium. This contains a lot more. This contains the inferior gluteal vein, artery, and nerve, the internal pudendal artery and vein, the pudendal nerve, the sciatic nerve, the posterior femoral cutaneous nerve, and the nerve to the obturator internus and quadratus femoris. So sciatica, it stems from the Greek word ischiaticus, which means pain in the hips, and this refers to the sciatic nerve, but that runs through it, the lesser sciatic foramen. So the obturator foramen is the final foramen and is surrounded by the rami of the ischium and pubis, and it contains the obturator nerve and vessels. So the perineum, there's two parts of the perineum. There's a superficial perineal pouch and a deep perineal pouch. The superficial perineal pouch contains the bulbospongiosus muscle. Bulbous means swelling, and spongious means porous. So this comes from Homer's Odyssey, when Ulysses kills his wife's suitors and mopped up the blood with a sponge. This muscle compresses spongy urethra to help empty it and assists with erection and ejaculation. And it covers the bulb of the penis or vestibular bulb. And then there's the ischiocavernosus muscle, and this word refers to the hollow spaces within the penis and clitoris where the muscle attaches. Ischia meaning hip and cavus meaning hollow. This compresses the penis and clitoris. And then there's the deep perineal pouch, which is formed by the folded perineal membrane. And this contains the urethra, which comes from the Greek word urethra, which allows a passage of urine, and this word was coined by Hippocrates. There's the vagina, which means sheath or scabbard for a sword, and this matches the word gladius, which means sword in Latin, but this was often used as a word for the penis. And there's the glands that are there, so the bulbourethral gland and the Cowper gland in males. There's the sphincter perineal muscles, such as the compressor urethra or the ureterovaginal sphincter. Now, in terms of the muscles of the pelvic wall, there's the piriformis muscle, which comes from two words in Latin, pirum meaning pear and forma meaning shape, due to its pear-shaped sort of thing. And it's involved in lateral rotation of the extended thigh and abducts flexed thigh at the hip. The origin is S2 and S4 and passes through the greater sciatic foramen. The obturator internus. Obturator comes from the word obture, which in Latin is used. It means close up. However, this is not what the muscle does, as it abducts at a flexed thigh and uses lateral rotation of the extended thigh. The obturator nerve supplies the adductor muscles, and that is why it's called the obturator nerve. And the origin is from the obturator membrane, and it passes through the lesser sciatic foramen. Both muscles insert on the greater trochanter of the femur. Now, the muscles of the pelvic floor include the pubo rectalis, which forms the urogenital diaphragm. This is right at the most anterior side, from the posterior pubic bone, and it slings around the rectum. Then you've got the pubococcygeus, which goes from the posterior side of the pubic bone to the coccyx. The iliococcygeus, which goes from the tendinous arch to the anococcygeal body. So these three muscles form the levator ani group of muscles. Levator meaning a lifter in Latin. So levator ani is a type of muscle that elevates the anus. Then there's the coccygeus. So this is the final muscle in the pelvic floor, and it runs from the ischial spine to the inferior end of the sacrum and coccyx. So in terms of arteries and veins, following are all the arteries that and veins that are involved within the pubic area. So for words that haven't been covered, there's the gluteal, superior and inferior gluteal artery. Gluteal comes from the Greek word gluteus, which means the rump, and the rump can be seen in a certain type of steak, a certain cut, and it refers to the buttocks of the cow. There's the pudendal, which comes from pudendum in Latin, which means something to be ashamed of, implying that the genitals were shameful. There's the vesicle, which comes from the word vesica, which means bladder. Aorta, so the abdominal aorta it has two gonadal arteries coming from it, and aorta originated when Aristotle used the word to describe the artery. Aorta means to be hung up, which is how the aorta seems to be in that position. And in terms of the veins, there's the internal iliac, which runs into the common iliac, and the gonadal runs into the inferior vena cava and left renal vein. So vena cava is a little bit more obvious from where the origin comes from. Vena is Latin for vein, and cava means hollow, so it literally means hollow vein. And in terms of nerves, there's the somatic versus visceral plexi. So somatic comes from the word soma, which means body, and this is the conscious innervation, and visceral from Latin visceralis, which means the inner part of the body. So this is unconscious innervation. So there's the lumbosacral plexus of the somatic plexi, and the coccygeal plexus. So lumbosacral plexus is L4 to S4, and coccygeal plexus is S5 to the coccygeal nerve. And the lumbosacral trunk enters through the greater sciatic foramen with the piriformis. Now the visceral plexus has two parts: the PNS and the SNS, and within the PNS there's the pelvic splanchnic, and splanchnic comes from the Greek origin splanchnikos, which means entrails or innards. In medicine, it usually refers specifically to the viscera of the abdomen. Thank you for listening.